I'm the worship associate for today, Will Wigmore. It's nice to see you all. Memorial Day, day set aside for remembering, but it's also a day of sunburns that you might remember. But remembering is important. I think of my father, in his youth, a World War II Navy pilot, and became an NYPD cop and detective. Years after he had passed away, I learned much more about how the war may have affected him, and possibly his job too. Today I'm remembering a friend of mine, Richard Kavanaugh. Richie was a guy I grew up with. We were young together. He was raised by a single mom in the houses that were torn down to build the projects. One bit of luck he had just turned 18 and he was supporting his mom, so the draft left him alone. He actually wrote a letter saying, "I'm not available," and they never got back to him, which is great. And he was a tough character, very good looking, with a gentle side. He liked Donovan and Smokey Robinson, and that's gentle, right? What we call the Summer of Love, 1967, is, I was 16 years old. Richie had just turned 18. And there were droves of runaway teens coming to New York's East Village and other places in the country, like, We befriended a trio of young women from Quincy, Massachusetts. Quincy. Kathy, Elaine, and Marilyn were disheveled and even younger than us. And they seemed to feel safe in our company. We took the subway out to Rockaway Beach, Queens, where we lived, which had its own ocean, which is kind of nice. Marilyn, the oldest, had just turned 16. One day I was surprised to find that Richie and Marilyn had locked souls. Suddenly they were a couple, another shift in a shifting reality. They found something special in each other, and that was great. The summer of love ended. It started to become the Northeast winter. And it came as a surprise to me when Richie contacted Marilyn's parents and said he's bringing her back to Massachusetts and promised that in 2 years, when she turned 18, he was going to come back and marry her. I was like, what? Who does that? Being 16. It was an adult thinking that I couldn't conceive of. He borrowed a van from work. He drove for Rizzo's Groceries, and Rizzo gave him the van, I think. And we drove up in the snow to New England, into the New England winter, which is a big deal. We took Kathy and Elaine and Marilyn back to Quincy. It seemed like 1,000,000 miles, and the 2 years we waited seemed like 1,000,000 years. But sure enough, the years passed, and he went back and got her, and they were off to California. And that was that. But that's not the memory I want to share. That winter, I think it was, after returning, I was in Richie's little apartment. We had taken something. It was the 60s. In the middle of the night, I sat bolt upright. We looked at each other, and something seemed to pass between us. It seemed like the alpha and the omega of the universe, expanding outward into space in a single, all-inclusive vibration. We gasped, "That's it!" I felt like I was part of an infinite universal life force. Everything that ever was or will be was in that. And like most feelings, it didn't last. Now let's fast forward to 2021. I get a call from Richie. He was in a care center, and he had the virus, the COVID virus. And he called to tell me that he was nearing the end, and this would be our last time that we'd talk in this world, at least. We laughed and joked about old friends and music and swimming in the ocean when we were kids, and still crazy after all these years conversation. And I'm glad we got to talk. It surprised me to hear that he had no memory of the universe expanding that night. Seriously, I was like, really? Oh, did that even happen? Memory's kind of selective, I guess. A few days later, Marilyn called from Santa Barbara to tell me Richie was gone. As far as the memorial, I said, this is his memorial, this conversation, and then that was that. Around then, I had a vivid dream about Richie. I dreamed we were walking in a dark street. It was bitter cold. He was glowing like a Hindu deity. And I covered him with my jacket to keep him warm. Well, that was the dream. Another dreamlike thing is my father passed away in 1977. My mother told us that he appeared to her in his navy whites to tell her everything's okay. And who's to say, what was real? Memory is profound and sometimes jarring part of our humanity. It may be what makes us human, whether it was from long ago or yesterday.
Our reading today is a poem called Dearly by Margaret Atwood. It's an old word, fading now. Dearly did I wish, dearly did I long for. I loved him dearly. I make my way along the sidewalk, mindfully because of my wrecked knees, about which I give less of a than you might imagine, since there are other things more important. Wait for it, you'll see. Bearing half a cup of coffee in a paper cup with, dearly do I regret it, a plastic lid, trying to remember what words once meant. Dearly. How was it used? Dearly beloved. Dearly beloved, we are gathered. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in this forgotten photo album I came across yesterday. Fading now. The sepias, the black and whites, the color prints. Everyone's so much younger. The Polaroids. What is a Polaroid? Asks the newborn. Newborn a decade ago. How to explain? You took the picture and then it came out the top. The top of what? It's that baffled look I see a lot. So hard to describe the smallest details of how all those dearly gathered together, of how we used to live. We wrapped up garbage in newspaper tied with string. What is newspaper? You see what I mean? String, though, we still have string. It links things together. A string of pearls, that's what they would say. How to keep track of the days. Each one shining, each one alone, each one then gone. I've kept some of them in a drawer on paper these days, fading now. Beads can be used for counting, as in rosaries. But I don't like stones around my neck. Along this street, there are many flowers fading now because it is August and dusty and heading into fall. Soon the chrysanthemums will bloom, flowers of the dead in France. Don't think this is morbid, it's just reality. So hard to describe the smallest details of flowers. This is a stamen, nothing to do with men. This is a pistol, nothing to do with guns. It's the smallest details that foil translators and myself too, trying to describe, see what I mean? You can wander away. You can get lost. Words can do that. Dearly beloved, gathered here together in this closed drawer, fading now. I miss you. I miss the missing, those who left earlier. I miss even those who are still here. I miss you all dearly. Dearly do I sorrow for you. Sorrow. It's another word you don't hear much anymore. I sorrow dearly. I have a dear friend who lives far enough away that we don't see each other often. But while attending a minister's event recently, I got to see her and her partner and their very new baby. And one of the things I wanted to do, if she wanted to, was to hear her birth story. Because I believe that giving birth is one of the major events in our lives, and that telling our stories is one of the ways we make sense of those things. And lucky for me, she wanted to. And so we went into another room with the baby, and she told me the story. How the baby was late and needed to be induced. Did need to be introduced too, frankly. But baby didn't react well to the medications. How they tried various interventions as their original birth plan flew out the window. But how the single most important thing on their birth plan, my friend wanted to feel supported, and her partner wanted to be a supportive partner, led them to choose a cesarean birth while it was still a choice and not an emergency situation. My friend was awake and got an epidural, so she was present for the birth, not drugged, and her partner was with her, supporting her, and could ask her if she wanted them to stay or follow baby once she was born. It wasn't the birth they'd hoped for, but it was the birth they got to choose, given all the things that happened. And being able to consciously make that choice made it 100 times better. My friend is learning how to tell that story, and I'm telling this with her permission. Learning how to make sense of the experience, how to turn a story that could have been hard into something empowering. I have stories like that, stories of challenging experiences that I get to choose how to tell. I'm sure you do too. When I was musing about what to write for this sermon, I realized that honestly, I think I'm going to get to write a whole series of sermons this fall on helping each other remember. I could have written about history, how those who don't remember history are doomed to repeat it. I could have written about dementia. I could have written about forgiveness and forgetting and how one may not be needed for the other to happen. But today I decided to write about stories, about the stories we tell, and about how language helps us make sense of those things that happen to us. How stories empower us to learn about people different from us and remember how we are all more similar than different. And how the actions of choosing how we tell our stories empower us. I read a sweet book a few days ago called Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. You've read it. Written by Benjamin Alir Sáenz, it's the story of two Mexican teenagers growing up in El Paso in the 1980s. Both of the boys are close with their parents, but Ari's family carries secrets. His dad doesn't ever talk about his experiences in Vietnam. And no one talks about Ari's older brother, Bernardo, who is serving a life sentence in prison. But in order for Ari to figure out about himself, he needs his family to start talking. And frankly, it's not comfortable when they start talking. Ari at one point says, "I kind of liked it better when you didn't talk about the war." But talking about stuff is how we heal. And I think that the fact that our stories are so siloed these days is a big factor in the huge political divide in our country. Because some of us are hearing stories through one lens, and the rest of us are hearing a very different set of stories. But because this is what we're hearing, it's very hard for each side to believe that they might be wrong. And it's important to realize that we might be wrong sometimes. One of my best friends from seminary thought this was so important that he got it tattooed on his left forearm. It says, "You might be wrong." Now, I know that facts are facts, and I am not suggesting that we should all start telling stories with alternative facts so we can get along better with our right-wing neighbors. However, I am saying, and I stand by this, that mostly people are good. Luke Bryan, who I never thought I would be singing in the pulpit, sings, "I believe most people are good and most mamas ought to qualify for sainthood. I believe most Friday nights look better under neon or stadium lights. I believe you love who you love, ain't nothing you should ever be ashamed of. I believe this world ain't half as bad as it looks. I believe most people are good." I believe that mostly people in this country and throughout the world are kind. They want to feed their families. They want to raise their kids to be happy and healthy. They want to take care of their folks and their neighbors. We may have slightly different ideas about how to do that, but not radically different ideas. Most everyone wants their kids to be safe. We have a group of people here today who are all friends from the neighborhood. They grew up together a block away from here, and they are having a reunion and are here today. And Rosanna, one of them, said, "What our little gang is discovering is how Americana our neighborhood was, and how nurtured we were in learning to help one another from our neighbors, from this church, and from our teachers. In fact, everybody in the shops around and the library who knew us and supported us, in helping each other remember, we realized that a good part of what made us good citizens came from the neighborhood in Oregon City." Thank you for that. I'll never forget an article that I read in The Atlantic several years ago. A family in Iowa, maybe, who was going to a county fair, and they were telling their school-age kids to be careful. And then they said, "But you know, everyone here voted for Trump, so really you can ask anyone for help and they'll help you." And I will confess that my first response to that was horror. But in redefining how I tell that story, I will instead think that everyone wants their kids to be safe. Everyone. And so we've just been taught such different stories about each other that we think people who vote differently from us are more of a danger to our kids, and that's sad to me. And also, I do need to say politically, some people are hurting our gay and trans kids with bathroom policies and book bans. That is true. And it is also true that telling our stories to one another, finding common ground, is one of the ways, is probably the best way that we are going to get past these silos that we have. Honestly, hearing stories about trans kids is what's going to change hearts and minds. In the February 2025 issue of The Atlantic, Derek Thompson writes about a conversation with Mark J. Dunkelman, a researcher at Brown University. He writes, "Imagine that a local parent disagrees with you about affirmative action at a PTA meeting. Online, you might write him off as a political opponent who deserves your scorn. But in a school gym full of neighbors, you bite your tongue. As the year rolls on, you discover that your children are in the same dance class. At pickup, you swap stories about caring for aging relatives. Although your differences don't disappear, they're folded into a peaceful coexistence. And when the two of you sign up for a committee to draft a diversity statement for the school, you will find that you can accommodate each other's opposing political views. It's politically moderating to meet thoughtful people in the real world who disagree with you," Dunkelman says. But if PTA meetings are still frequently held in person, many other opportunities to meet and understand one's neighbors are becoming a thing of the past. an important implication of the death of that middle ring, not our closest people and not our fandoms, people who like us are Red Sox fans or Bengals fans or Lord of the Rings fans. But these middle people, our village, is missing these days. An important implication of the death of the middle ring is that if you have no appreciation for why the other side has their narrative, you'll want your own side to fight them without compromise. We struggle these days. The world is moving so fast. We spend so much more time on screens and in our households and less time in larger groups getting to know more people. Again, this is one of the biggest reasons church matters. Because here we have the chance to hear one another's stories. Will's story of growing up in the 60s in New York City. Joyce's stories about growing up Jewish in New York. Heather's stories about living with chronic illness. Kate's stories of intergenerational family right here in West Lynn. It's good for us to hear each other's stories. It's good for us to hear each other's stories. I think one of the hardest things about this new era is that to some extent, we've gone from sharing stories to sharing images. And it's harder to find common ground in images. 100 years ago, it was rare to have your portrait made. People did it only a couple of times in their lives. Letters traversed over land, sometimes taking weeks to get someplace. We wrote emotions, not facial expressions. Now we take selfies and post them. We see images of ourselves and others constantly, but I think that instead of seeing ourselves in one another like we might do in stories, we feel more and more separated. One of the gifts of spending more and more time with my dad these days is that I'm getting to go deeper into some of his stories. Many of them, especially the Coast Guard ones, I have heard dozens of times. It's a little embarrassing. I can tell them more accurately than he can now. They're the ones that he brings out for new folks, the stories of who he was. They make people laugh, and my dad likes to make people laugh. But recently, I've gotten to go a little deeper with my dad into his stories. How when he was in high school, he took care of his own mother, who had multiple sclerosis. Genetic traits my dad and I share, like a need to get out of the house and go see things, and a desire to talk to people. It's helped me make more sense of my childhood, which is a gift. It's helped me make more sense of who I am, and it helps me understand him better. Margaret Atwood says, "Dearly beloved, gathered here in this closed drawer, fading now, I miss you. I miss the missing, those who left earlier. I miss even those who are still here." We can't do much about those who are gone, except, as Joan said today, keep to saying their names. But we can do something about missing those who are still here. Reach out. Listen to their stories. Listen to how they tell their stories. Listen to how you tell your own stories and the sense you make of your life by telling your stories. If how you tell your stories isn't serving you, you can shift them some. You can find new meaning in them. We won't get past the way this nation is until we listen to each other. Start small. Move out. Find common ground and go from there. Common ground exists, my friends. I promise. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.